Well, what you're going to find first is this context of all this research I did with kids so that you can actually start to see things through your kids' eyes. Because one of the big problems we have is we don't really understand our kids' perspective. We've developed a one-way communication style because we were handed an infant, and we're in this one-way communication, and we've got to change that into a two-way communication style. So you're going to gain a ton of understanding of what your kid's thinking. And I've had a mom that was in the test group of reading as I was writing it, and by chapter 7, she started sitting down with her 12-year-old daughter who had major anger problems and was going, and she was going, the book, this guy's saying this about kids and this, and she's like, I don't know who you're listening to, but he really knows what he's talking about. And by chapter 13, the mom contacted me and said, I've changed what I'm doing. My daughter's anger issue's gone. And so what you're going to find is answers that go contrary to everything we've heard out there. But you're going to find answers that actually work, because I spent time wrestling with 3,000 kids and my own kids over the last 20 years to find a way to work with our kids so that they want to follow us. They don't have to follow us or else. And it's going to bring peace. It's going to bring deeper conversations. It's going to bring understanding. It's going to bring compassion and what I call mutual respect. And so many parents are saying, my kid doesn't respect me. Well, maybe that's because we're not leaning like Jesus.
My wife and I were talking yesterday about some families that we know, and you see them from the outside, and boy, it looks like the great Christian family, and Bible studies and faith in the home and what have you. And then the kids some of them maybe take a left turn or whatever, and you wonder why. And what you're saying, I guess, is found in those interviews. What was the one or two things that we can change as parents that our kids, out of those researches, told you?
Well, I think one of the things we need to understand as parents that we haven't been taught is that only 5% of thoughts and emotions are conscious. 95% are unconscious. And so much of what we've been trained to do as parents is to focus on the conscious part, or the behavior, the green part of the weed we can see. But what we don't realize is every time you cut off the top of a weed, the root system almost doubles in size. What we haven't been trained to do is go after the roots. So we start to see our kids doing things that concern us or frustrate us, and we keep attacking that, and it doesn't change. And it starts to lead to hurt and conflict in the relationship, and negativity starts to come into the relationship between parents and kids. And what the kids told us in the research was when that negativity started, they couldn't figure out how to reverse it. They would try for a while, and they would try and be perfect for a while, and they couldn't. And so they felt like they were in this constant losing battle. And that's what we saw in the expectation research, which was, we put a group of 26 kids. The first group was 26 kids from 7 different youth groups in a room, broke them into groups of 3 to 5, had them list all the expectations they felt they needed to live up to be a good Christian and to be a good child of their parent. We got 43 items on the board, and the list was undoable. In fact, many times it competed with each other, like, don't hang out with sinful people, but reach your non-Christian friends. Well, how does that work? And so the expectations that they were feeling were just crushing them. And one of the expectations that was on the list all the time was, I have to be perfect around my parents. Every time I screw up, every time I don't have a good attitude, every time they're coming down on me. And so they felt like they had to be perfect around us, which is why they started to avoid us. And that's where we were starting to cost ourselves influence in their lives. That's one. The second was how we approached their failures. Very frustrated, very hurt by how we approached their failures, because as they got older, especially, they'd say, this isn't fair. If I yell at my mom, my cell phone gets taken away. But when she yells at me, nothing happens to her. This isn't fair. And what we found in the research was that they're sitting there, and they are being convicted by the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is convicting, and when we come in and jump on them like we have to be the convicting agent in their life, it hurts them, it pushes them away, it hands the world influence. And we just don't see Jesus taking that approach, even with Peter, where Peter says, I'm not going to deny you, and Jesus warns him 3 times. He doesn't come down on him. He lets him go ahead and encounter that failure of of denying him, and the Holy Spirit comes in and convicts him and changes his life and changes his heart. And one of the things we haven't been taught to do as parents is to use the Holy Spirit in the way we parent. You'll find that in the book as well.
Now, practicality. The kids' room is horrible. I mean, it's filthy. They climb over a stack of dirty clothes to even get to the bed that was never made up. How do you change that behavior just by saying, I sure wish you'd clean up that room?
Well, I think the problem there normally started 5 years before that or 4 years before that. And something broke down. And their desire to please and their desire to take care of themselves broke down for some reason. And so the beginning point of that is actually fixing the relationship. What's broken down in the relationship? How do I get that position of influence back in my kid's life? Because a kid that's not willing to clean his room and the parents putting tons of pressure on, and because of the changes in the adolescent brain, pressure doesn't work with kids. There's a lot that's in the book as well, and all the changes that happen in the adolescent brain and how it destroys our relationship with our kids. But this kid has gotten to a point where he doesn't care. And so to fix that, you've got to go back and fix the relationship and fix what went wrong back here, the root. Because what you're seeing is the green part of the weed, which is the wrong. But what's the root underneath that behavior? Why is it he's lost motivation? Why is it he doesn't care about taking care of himself, his environment? What's the roots underneath that? And when we start attacking the roots, things on the surface change really quickly, and they change permanently. When we just cut off the top of the weed, it grows back. And we get more and more frustrated, and the conflict increases with our kids. And then, when that conflict increases, we're losing influence.
Maybe Barney Fire thought it right. Nip it in the bud, huh?
Hey, Jeff, hang on just a minute. We're butting our 8 o'clock time frame. Can you stay with us for a few minutes?
Yeah.
Hang on a minute, find out where it's at, Keith, and I'll ask him another question on the other side of 8 o'clock.
All right, where can we get the book?
OneRuleHome.com.
All right, OneRuleHome.com. Very good. All right, Jeff, going to stay with us in the next half hour, and just what a fascinating look into parenting and how we can maybe change some things. And if you're a new parent, here's how you can get started on the right track. So stay with us, Jeff. We'll be right back on Good Morning Ozarks. Keith O'Neill, Charlie Ingram here on Life FM. We've got 37 degrees as we get started today. Kristen's going to keep us updated on the weather. We'll continue right here on Life FM. Welcome to the 8 o'clock half hour of Good Morning Ozarks. Keith O'Neill and Charlie Ingram with you. Glad you're with us at 8:02 on the 27th of March, the day the Lord has made. We're going to rejoice and be glad in it. Jeff Schadt is with us. Jeff talked in the last half hour some about his book, and we're going to continue that. But if you missed the first half hour, go to klfcradio.com and listen to the podcast.
Well, I take exception with something Jeff said. He did a good interview the first half hour. He talked about things with kids, which I think was good, taking these kids from a different youth group, listening to them. I thought that was good. But he never listened to Vance.
He didn't listen to Vance. He didn't listen to my dad either.
Because my dad said it's my way or the highway.
That's exactly what mine said. I mean, he was strict. It's like, I don't care what you do. I got lots of spankings when I was a kiddo, and I'd say my dad's relationship and with mine was anything but the way Christ leads the home, that's for sure.
Your comment, Jeff?
My comment was, that's the way I started parenting my kids, was the my way or the highway, growing kids God's way, which was very structured and very much, I spanked my kids when they were young as well, at least before I did the research. And, the outcome was by age 9, my daughter was very defensive. And would not admit she was wrong, have to argue with her over something small she did wrong for an hour to get her to admit she was wrong, because what I discovered in the research was she was afraid of the consequence that I was going to issue her. And what I discovered in the research was our consequences were actually motivating our kids to lie to us. As they get a little older, they get 6, 7, 8 years old, they start to figure out, wait a minute, if I hide this mistake I made from my parents, I won't get that consequence. And if it has to do with, as they get older, their cell phone and not losing contact with their friends, it's a really powerful motivation to want to hide and lie. And if we step back to the Old Testament, that's what we see there too. I don't want to give up my best ram, so I'm going to look perfect on the outside, but inside I'm a million miles from God, and that's why Jesus said, rightly does Isaiah prophesy about you hypocrites. You honor me with your lips, but your hearts are far from me. In vain do you worship me. And that gives me some heartburn when I look at the kids in my research, which we found 70, 80, 90% of kids leading dual lives. In other words, when they were around their parents, they knew how to act and put on an act to look and try and keep the peace. But when they were away from their parents and no other adults were around, the way they were leading their life was anything but Christian. And it was setting them up to head the wrong direction when they left our homes. And that's where I started going, wow, there's something really wrong in this process. And it was that my way or highway mindset that was causing this, because they weren't choosing to follow. They were having to follow or else. And I can tell you, if God took that approach with me and I had to be perfect around God, and I couldn't be, and every time I stepped out of line with God, there was some type of lightning bolt that came down and gave me a 3,000-volt shock, I wouldn't be chasing them around the lake. I'd be hiding from it. And that's what we found in the research, was the kids were afraid of their parents.
Jeff, do you think that it's important? Do you think it's important as parents that we make sure that the kid understands they did something? I mean, like you said, your daughter took an hour to decide that she was wrong on something. Is that important? And then the second part of the question is, you said you were spanked, I was spanked, Charlie was spanked, you spanked your kids. Spanking still part of the discipline factor we ought to think about?